Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore storytelling on film, as well as interviews with industry professionals who work in film, television, or theater. I want to welcome to the show Paul Benedict Rowan, who has worked as a journalist since 1984. He has published 3 books: The Team That Jack Built in 1994, Champagne Football, which he co-authored and which was released in 2020. And in 2019, he was the joint winner of the News Brands Campaigning Journalism and Investigative Journalism Awards for his work on FAI. And his very recent book, which we're talking about today, is Ryan's Daughter, The Making of an Irish Epic, which I absolutely loved. Paul, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome, Robert.
As I said, I love the book. I mean, I knew that this was, a tough shoot, but this was beyond a tough shoot. But this is a great, really, really great read. Anyone who's you don't even have to be a film buff, to really to get involved on how difficult the making of Ryan's Daughter was. I just wanted to ask off the top, because when I Googled the book online, now, was it originally called Making Ryan's Daughter: The Myths, Madness, and Mastery, or was that like the hardcover edition?
That was how the book was published in Ireland.
Okay. So it had a different title there.
So, yeah, I think the American publishers, University Press of Kentucky, they wanted to get Irish in there somewhere, so that's how they went with a slightly different subhead.
Okay.
But yeah, the myths, the mastery, and the madness, all the M's, bit of alliteration there, and yeah, it was all that and more, I suppose. And I actually wanted to shatter a lot of the myths. That was part of the job I was planning to do, and I think I succeeded, actually, without being too big-headed about it. There are so many myths about the movie. It's a question of separating the facts from the myths,
right?
And I think I succeeded in doing that, and we're still left with an amazing story.
Oh no, absolutely.
The facts are as strange as fiction, and so I didn't get to the bottom of everything. But I left, sometimes I had to tell 2 sides of one particular story, and people could kind of, I suppose, make up their own minds themselves if they needed to, and they don't necessarily need to. I mean, it's just part of the whole story. I mean, I can give you an example straight away on that, Robert. I mean, which was the question of whether Sarah Miles had an affair with Robert Mitchum or not. They're the 2 big stars in the film. Sarah Miles, a young actress coming through. This is her big break. She's starring alongside one of the giants of Hollywood, who had a reputation for shall we say, dating his leading ladies, and who clearly Sarah was besotted with, but it's worth bearing in mind that Sarah Miles's husband, Robert Bolt, was on location for virtually the entire time as well. So, so everybody thought they were having an affair, but perhaps it was just Sarah being Sarah, kind of a rather kind of flighty and I suppose, can we still say the word flirtatious in some ways? Woman, and liked to be thought of as being desired by somebody like Robert Mitchum. So the reason why I got into it at all was because it did have quite a unsettling effect to some degree on the movie, particularly when they were going through weeks when they couldn't shoot and everybody was hanging around doing nothing, and David Lean, the director, was tearing his hair out, and Robert Bolt was upset about something. So that was one of the examples. But overall, I think there's so much kind of rich detail about the making of the film. Besides that, and we got to the bottom of quite a few things. So I'm sure we'll get into a few of those as the next hour goes on.
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. What was it? Because because I know you had said that as a journalist, when when you hear a good story, you want to run with it. So what was it about this, the making of this film, that you felt was worth writing a book about and doing all those interviews for years? Why this story?
Uh, yeah, part of the reason is I have an enormous affinity with the area in which it was filmed, which is, for any of your viewers who know Ireland will know that Kerry is kind of one of the most beautiful
Mm,
and remote parts of what is a very beautiful country, the Emerald Isle. People in Ireland don't particularly like the expression the Emerald Isle. They think it's a bit fanciful, a bit romantic, but it's a great place to shoot for Hollywood directors who want to shoot some beautiful scenery. And obviously, John Ford filmed The Quiet Man up in Galway on the west of Ireland.
mm.
David Lean came further south down to Kerry, which is another one of the renowned beauty spots, which is where me and my family have been on holiday since I was kind of knee high to a grasshopper, really. So I'd heard all the stories down the years, about the stars, as they call them down there, the stars going
Right.
into the pubs and the hotels and the restaurants, and just generally, how they mingled with the locals who are kind of a farming stock, really. One might say like that peasant Irish kind of stock, a lot of them.
Mm.
So it's kind of a place that was kind of, you might think it was back in the 1930s, really, when they came there in late 1969. So it just had all the ingredients of a great story, and I wasn't disappointed when I started pulling the layers back.
No, and I don't think anyone would be, because, like I said, it's one hell of a story. Whether you're a fan of the film or not, or a film fan or not, it's one hell of a story. So you started the interviews in 1999 until 2003. So why did the book take another almost 20 years to come out?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, 1999. I think I interviewed Sarah Miles. Well, she was one of the first people I interviewed. And her stories were so outrageous, I suppose you might say, that I just had to dig further. Um, and um, so I did an article at the time, for a big article for one of the papers in Ireland, and um, and I kind of went from there. And I suppose, Robert, to be kind of rather kind of what you might say, um, cold about it. I wanted to get as many people to as many people as possible, for the very obvious reason that some of them weren't going to be around for very much
Right.
longer. So I spoke to the producer, Anthony Havelock Allen, who was in his 90s, but still very, very articulate, great memory retention, really, really great stories, very generous with his time. And John Mills, who was like
Mm.
94, 95, in the same, John Mills, Sir John Mills, he won an Oscar, of course, for his part as
He
the
was
idiot in
so
that
amazing.
film.
I actually thought, when I first saw the film, I actually thought that he was someone they just got there locally. I mean, he was like, I mean, I know they did, the makeup was incredible, the teeth they put in his mouth. I mean, they really transformed it, but his behavior, I mean, he did barely said a word. I mean, it's so incredible. What a performance.
Yeah, I mean, no, he had no dialogue, no lines at all.
Mm.
But kind of a performance that really split opinion. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people
I
didn't
loved it.
like it.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Oh.
They just thought it was kind of a bit showy, I suppose.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and one of the things I didn't like about it was the music that accompanied him every time he appeared on screen. That was this kind of
Right.
jingly jangly score, which kind of grated with me, I have to say. But listen, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. John Mills was happy to speak to me, and I was more than happy to speak to him.
Hmm.
And so the reason then why, it was a very mundane reason. why there was that big hiatus, I suppose you'd say, of 16 years before it got published, was that I suddenly got offered another writing job, which was very precious to me, and so I had I kind of threw myself into that for quite a long time, and it paid the bills, perhaps as well. So
Right.
so I kind of so I had to put the book aside for quite a long time, which kind of broke my heart, you know, to some degree, because there were one or two other publications came out which were totally, I think wouldn't be too biased when I said they were totally inferior to what I did, and fine. With the 50th anniversary coming up, I said, you know, now's the time to do the book.
Hmm.
So that's really how that particular thing happened. So it wasn't like I was spending 15 years doing interviews. You know,
Right. I see.
I was doing interviews for 3 or 4 years. Um, as I said to you earlier, I'm based in London, so all the film crew were still sort of in that sort of 50-mile radius of London. There was a British crew that worked on that film. You know, so David Lean's crew were mostly English. So I was able to get good access to them. And then I also traveled over to Spain to speak to some of the crew who lived in Spain, people who expats, Brit expats, etc. And I went to Los Angeles, where I spoke to Christopher Jones and one or two others, which was just an incredible experience for me. So and then of course I went to Dingle itself and spoke to the local people. So really I kind of got the story that nobody else got, and I'm quite proud of that, actually. And I think it really stood me in good stead with the book.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm curious what Christopher Jones was like to talk to, because he's been such a mysterious figure in Hollywood. I mean, he only did one other movie after this, but like well over 20 years later. What was he like personally? Because there's a lot of strange, stories about him.
Yeah, it was. I'd love to say I spoke to him eye to eye. In fact, I went to Los Angeles and he wouldn't speak to me face to face, but he
Okay.
spoke to me on the phone several times. I think probably because he felt guilty that that I'd come all the way over and he wouldn't see me. But he was very generous with his time on the phone, and I'd love to have met him. I mean, like, he was such an enigmatic kind of character. I don't like using the word enigmatic because it means you don't really understand them, and my job is to understand people to some degree. But he was a real kind of mysterious guy in lots of ways, and somewhat misunderstood. Again, I didn't particularly like him in the film, but I've seen him in other films where I think he's a great actor.
Yeah, I agree.
Really, like The Looking Glass War. I think he's superb in that.
Yeah.
So I think all the hype about Christopher Jones at the time in the late '60s was well justified. He was a smashing young actor, and but a great talent. But perhaps he just didn't have that kind of driving ambition and kind of ruthlessness, and he kind of self-destructed
Yes.
in a lot of ways, and partly self-destructed on Ryan's daughter. I mean, like, he was dating one of the most beautiful young women in the world at the time, in Olivia Hussey, who was the star of Romeo and Juliet, and that all went pear-shaped when he was in Dingle, unfortunately. And then there was the incident. I know it sounds wild, but the Manson murders
Right.
at the house of Sharon Tate and Polanski, kind of there was a ripple effect of that into Ryan's daughter, in that Jones was quite friendly with Tate and was very badly affected by her murder, and furthermore, Jones's manager, Rudy Altobelli, actually owned that house in Cielo Drive, Polanski and Tate had rented it off him. So there was all sorts of ripples about that, and guys like Mitchum were kind of worried that Robert was worried that one of his children was at the house, at a party at the house and stuff like that. So because they were of that age, they were the same age as Sharon Tate. So where am I going with this? I mean, Christopher Jones, he
was also the drugging, right? I mean, they drugged the which I remember I actually heard that before I read the book, and I was sort of horrified that but then when I read the book, I couldn't help but laugh that just to get this guy to just to get him to relax, and because he was arguing and so difficult with lean, and he refused to rehearse, and he said he wasn't attracted to Sarah Biles, and he had to do these passionate lovemaking scenes, so they gave him some I suppose it was a marijuana brownie or something, or something along those lines.
I'd say it might have been a lot of Valium or something.
Okay,
so there's all sorts of kind of wild stories about that that he almost had to be calmed down, that he was actually kind of swaying, his moods were swinging from one extreme to the other, so they kind of almost tranquilized him. And those kind of tranquilizer drugs were very popular at the time. They were completely it was kind of like the Wild West when it came to tranquilizers and everything else. You could buy them over the counter, and so that's the closest I've got to finding out what the substance was that they put in his food. But several people have spoken about actually spiking his food or his drink with this substance. Olivia Hussey being one.
Right.
She said that she was instructed by one of Jones's other managers, a guy called Stuart Cohen. He had two managers there to do this, and David Lean apparently got Sarah Miles herself to sneak into the caravan. And so Sarah says, so there was 3 or 4 people it was like the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I mean, who was actually responsible for it? I mean, really, but it did happen. And
I hate to laugh, but there is something very darkly funny about it. And horrifying at the same time.
It's kind of a shame, because for Christopher Jones, this was his big chance.
Yeah.
He had been in quite a few kind of alternative movies in the 60s. And Wild in the Streets and movies like that, and Three in an Attic, and those kind of movies, kind of B kind of movies, but popular nonetheless. And this was his kind of big break into Hollywood. It just went all wrong, and he had this nervous breakdown either on the set or when he went back to Los Angeles and was actually living in the house where Tate was murdered.
Right. Of all the places to go to.
I mean, it's a bit like, jumping from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, you probably should have gone to Goa or somewhere like that, and chilled out for a while. But no, he went there. Did you get the impression?
Sorry, go ahead.
Pardon?
I was just.
Unfortunately, that's where, I mean, that Olivia Hussey and himself, they had a very, very violent falling out.
Right.
Olivia, in her autobiography, released after Christopher died about 4 or 5 years ago, released after he died, said that she was raped by Christopher Jones in the house, and it was very, very ugly what happened. And so Christopher Jones, when I spoke to him, put up a kind of a modestly articulate defense of his behavior, but did kind of say, listen, I was a bit of a jerk, and I made Lee's life a hard time, and I was doing it to get overage. He wanted to, he was slowing the production down so he could get paid overtime. Which is not very professional, let's say. I'm sure you would never do anything like that, or or your colleagues these days. But
no.
No, but anyway,
you'd be sacked.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So But himself and Sarah hated each other.
Right.
That was part of the problem, and he said that she was nasty to him first, and that he became nasty as a result.
It's
So
like
she
children.
started it.
He did it
She
first.
started it. Yeah, exactly. But whereas Sarah would say, "Well, he started it."
Oh my
You know,
God.
so it was one of those ones.
Well, I must say, I know a lot of people found him to be quite, lifeless, but I don't know. I quite enjoyed his performance in it. I actually thought, I mean, his character is sort of on the verge of suicide and does have uh, a look of, defeat in his eyes, and I felt that he got to that, even though scene right before he has that passionate kiss in the bar with Sarah Miles, and the tapping of the foot of John Mills, and then it's like a PTSD, the flashback to the bombs dropping. As he was shell shocked from his war experiences. I thought he was. I don't know. I don't. I quite liked him in it. I thought even though him and Sarah Miles hated each other, I thought they convinced me that that passion in those in that kiss was quite strong. And even later, the lovemaking scene. I mean, I know that you had written people had laughed when he would cut to like the flowers blooming and and stuff like that. But I don't know. I thought it was quite tender and sensual,
Yeah, yeah.
and I know
No,
that
yeah,
Lean
no,
said that was one of his favorite scenes that he
yeah,
ever
yeah. He
shot.
did.
Right?
Yeah,
Was the
he
the
did.
bar
Yeah,
scene?
yeah. No, I totally take on board what you say. Like,
He was
you know,
dubbed though, so I mean, then again, maybe the
yeah.
voice wasn't good, but
No,
eh,
yeah, I was about to say he was dubbed,
yeah,
but still, no. I mean, he said he was dubbed because he refused to go to London
right, right,
to do the dubbing, and he was having a nervous breakdown in Los Angeles. Others would say, well, look, he sounded like Gary Cooper the whole time, and there was no way, he just couldn't do an English accent.
mm,
Like, not just an English accent, the accent of an upper class British officer, which was what was required.
right,
And but yeah, no, he was very brooding, very good night, very good to look at.
yeah,
And his defense was, up to the time I spoke to him, was, I was underplaying it. I wasn't, it's not a piece of theater. I wasn't doing it for the guys in the room. I was doing it for how it would look on camera.
mm,
And so there was that kind of cultural divide in some ways between the British kind of way of doing things and the American way of doing things. So,
true,
but he was, he was acting for the camera, and well, that might sound a bit trite. I knew what he meant, and he said that Lean was very appreciative when he looked back at the rushes, saying, "I'm sorry, I can see now what you're trying to do." And yeah, the bar scene is a very powerful scene, and as you say, it was one of Lean's the things that he was most proud of about in that movie, because as Lean explained, the kind of the storyline was kind of very predictable. You could see what was going to happen here. The Rosie Ryan was involved in a kind of an unhappy marriage, and then this very dashing British officer suddenly comes into the village, who's her age, etc., etc., and everybody immediately can see that she's going to have an affair with this guy. So Lean was arguing, well, we've got to get them together as quickly as possible, otherwise everybody will be sort of, we'll know in advance what's going to happen, and we'll almost be kind of bored by the time it happens.
yeah,
So he
yeah.
did have to make it happen very quickly. That's what
It
he did.
certainly did. Yeah, it came just out of nowhere. It came certainly out of nowhere, but it really
Yeah.
worked, beautifully. That they just suddenly look at each other and boom, it's like they're two magnets.
Mm,
I thought that
mm.
was that was really good. And the irony is that that behind the scenes they hated each other, and she seemed to be more attracted to Mitchum, and in the film it's the other way around, right? Like so
Yes.
again, there was
Yeah.
another story that just um, really made me laugh out loud. But Mitchum, I've always loved Mitchum and known him for a lot of the tough guy parts he played, and even with journalists, he was known to be quite, cold and short with them, short tempered, or he would say very little, one word answers. and things like that. But I was surprised to see how much of a jovial, outgoing, and funny guy he was, and a prankster, really, like a real prankster. I mean, did that come as a surprise to you? Did you know much about him before
Yeah,
researching
it
the
did come
book?
as a surprise to me. It did come as well. I didn't know much about him before, full stop. Really, to be honest with you, Robert. I mean, just having seen him in some of the movies, really. So I kind of came to him with a kind of an open book, really. And what a character he was. I mean, wow. It sure did break the mold after he went, because he was. I mean, his backstory, we could be here till next Christmas talking
Oh, for
about that.
sure, for
Um,
sure.
but I think that kind of, just to pick up on your initial point, his kind of relationship with journalists. Like, I think he was seen in Hollywood during the 40s and 50s as being a kind of a guy on the edge. He had his drug busts and stuff like that at a time when when that could destroy your career,
Right,
and attempts were made to destroy his career. You'll see it, like it's referenced in LA Confidential. You can see, up to more recently, like, and
right, right,
and then so 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 he used to get these, what they call, reverse citations. The most uncooperative actor, as voted for by the Women's Hollywood Writing Guild, type of thing, kind of weird kind of stuff. And they'd invite him along, and he'd come, like he wouldn't come for a proper, but in fact, he was absolutely fine, as far as I can see. I mean, I've seen interviews read that are supposed to, where he's supposed to be curt. He's just being kind of irreverent and rude,
right.
actually, but actually great material for an interviewer, an interviewee. I'm not saying he's being rude towards the interviewee. He's simply being rude, being kind of irreverent about things, and he's probably having too much to drink as well. So, so he was. You wouldn't really know what he's going to say. He was a bit of a loose cannon. But he had this tough guy exterior. I mean, but was supposed to be a very sensitive guy beneath it all. He thought that acting was a kind of a sissy profession, that he just happened to be good at. At least
Right.
this is what he said on many occasions. So he was constantly kind of playing down the whole kind of myth of acting and saying, I don't even perform. I just just switch the
Right.
camera on and I just do it, type of thing. So there was a lot of that. Like, Lean was a
But
kind of
then
a,
people often said, "Oh, but actually, the truth was that he worked harder than anybody,
yeah,
on parts."
yeah, yeah. And well, he also had a photographic memory, so like
Yeah.
he could learn his lines, just look at them once and know them, and deliver them impeccably. So he had incredible talent,
Oh, absolutely.
but he constantly played it down, and he just didn't get on with Lean in a way, like for instance, he'd be messing around on the set, and then he'd sort of click into character like in a second, and then as soon as the Lean or somebody would say cut, he'd go back straight away to telling the same joke he was telling before before the camera
Before
had
they
been
said
switched
action,
on.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So and David was kind of annoyed by the kind of how kind of frivolously he seemed to be taking it,
Right.
and in fact, what happened then was when Lean got annoyed and kind of angry, that made Mitchum behave even worse. He
Right.
got into that kind of cycle, that oh, well, he thinks I'm a clown, so I'm really play up to that. So they kind of their relationship didn't work at all in that way, and as the mountain never came to Muhammad or vice versa. So it was a bit of a shame, because they're two giants of the movie industry in their own way,
Oh,
and it
definitely.
would have been wonderful if they could have if it all could have worked well for the two of them, but it didn't quite.
No, I know. I know that I used, towards the end of they were going to work together again years later, right? And then Lean
Yeah.
passed. So like, I guess there was some kind of mutual respect, even though personally they didn't get along. But I think they admired each other's talents, as you had described.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know.
they also kind of needed each other in a way, Robert, because in 1969, like Mitchum's career was really on the wane, and that's no pun intended there. But like cowboy movies were going out of business, kind of that kind of thing. He had done he'd done a series of what's the word for it, bombs really, like. And so when Lean came looking for his services, this was like a kind of a serious movie for him to do that was going to restore his reputation, or indeed give his career a bit of inject some kind of life into it. So there was a lot of very sound reasons for Mitchum to take that role, and there was a lot of sound reasons for Lean to offer it to him, because he needed a big American actor's name over the up in lights. Otherwise, MGM wouldn't have given them the money to make that movie. So
right.
But and I think that was the kind of same situation when David came back to him, like in so we're talking about 1990s, late 80s, I think, when he was going to make a movie called Nostromo based on that Joseph Conrad book.
Yes.
Going to do it in a studio down in the south of France, and he wanted Robert Mitchum to play a part. I'm not sure which one, and they got together over dinner, and it almost was like I think there'd been some kind of a truce had been brokered in advance, that they'd come to respect each other a lot more, as the years went on. But then David Lean got very sick and died, and the movie was never made. So that was what happened there, So as Robert Mitchum put it, the bum died on me, So Mitchum wasn't giving Lean a break right till the end, So
well,
anyway,
Mitchum also is someone, I don't know if people necessarily feel he was bad in the film, but like they do with Jones, like people have mixed opinion, but a lot of people feel he was miscast. How do you feel about Mitchum in this role?
I think I enjoy it. I mean, I enjoyed his performance. I mean,
So did
I suppose, like as I said to you, I didn't come with any preconceptions about Mitchum, except like I'd seen some of his films, but I wasn't of the age where I knew of Mitchum, his kind of tough guy persona and everything.
Yeah.
Like people like I wouldn't have considered myself a movie buff. I consider myself a writer and a journalist and a reporter. So people like Pauline Kael couldn't see past Robert Mitchum's kind of true life persona. They couldn't see past
a lot
the
of
fact
the
that
noirs
this tough guy was playing a soft Irish school teacher who gets cuckolded by by a limping Christopher Jones. Like for them, it was just completely unbelievable. But I thought Mitchum was good in it personally. I thought he put in a good
Oh, I
performance.
totally agree. I thought actually that he was exceptional in it. I bet particularly that really terrifying scene where they're all right when they cut Sarah Miles' hair off, and he's trying to stop him, and they hold him down. And just every time he looks up, the look of defeat. There's nothing he could do about it. I mean, he tried so hard, and I like how that scene goes on for so long. I thought they were going to kill her, and then they cut her hair totally off, right? But you didn't really see Mitchum in that part, but he was totally convincing. I thought it was just subtle and soft. I mean, he really touched into that sensitive side that he would always have underneath the more brooding, tough guy. But he really brought that to the forefront. I thought he was very good.
I think one thing that was difficult to, like, the sheer size of him, like he is so big, like
that's true.
It was kind of difficult to to see it, and I think he had to kind of hunker down almost to and they actually had to pad up some of the other actors because he just looked so big beside them. People like Father Collins. It's funny you should mention that scene about the cutting Miles's hair off, because like the punishment for an Irish peasant girl having an affair with a British officer back then in the in the 1920s if the Irish kind of IRA got hold of her, you know, that she could have been tarred and feathered. You know, like I wouldn't say she wasn't not saying she'd have been murdered or killed, but they tar and feather you. It's been known to any woman who had an affair with a British officer. You know, it was considered a kind of a traitorous act at the time, because there was a war going on against British occupation. But it did happen, you know. It happened on very rare occasions, very, very rare occasions. But I think they kind of toned it down a bit, but just by cutting her hair off, because it could have been a lot worse in real life.
Yeah, well, that's what it certainly felt like. It was going that way. So I thought,
Yeah.
well, thank God that's all they did. I mean, that was pretty bad in itself. But
yeah,
I was like, you know, at least they didn't kill her or beat her up truly bad, you know, really badly. You know, there was something you talked about how, you know, Robert Bolt, the screenwriter, and Lean, they were discussing what to do, you know, what film to do next, and they thought, well, why don't we try to get back to the intimate stories that Lean did early in his career, like Brief Encounter. Let's go away from the epics of, you know, Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. And then, of course, it turned into an epic in a sense on this big, in these landscapes. But I was curious, you know, after getting to know these two men, what do you think about the actual content of the story appeal to them? I mean, it's really this coming of age about a woman, or sexual awakening of a young woman. I was curious, did you have any insight as to what it was that appealed to these, you know, these older guys about that story?
Good question. I think possibly in the case of Robert Bolt, his having met Sarah Miles, who's you know the lead actress in Ryan's Daughter, you know, he wanted to make her a star. You know, she had been in some good British movies and was obviously a very good actress, and he wanted to make her an international star. So he kind of came up with this adaptation of the book, Flabbert's book, Madame Bovary,
Right.
which basically is what Ryan's Daughter is. It's a kind of a, you know, a much altered version of Madame Bovary, which is kind of the tale of a simple French girl, actually, as it happens. I don't like saying simple and girl, but you know what I mean. It's a young French woman who, from a certain class, who tries to better herself in the world, and it leads to kind of tragedy. Now, and partly as a result of having of discovering this, you know, of having this affair, and her passions overcoming her, I suppose. I think, you know, one of the kind of reasons given as to why Lean and Bolt were attracted to the story was what was happening in their own lives. You know, that's Robert was a lot older. Robert Bolt was a lot older than Sarah Miles. He'd been in a marriage which ended unhappily, and then he'd met Sarah, and like he was sort of 20 years older than her. So the storyline kind of, he was also a school teacher before he became a writer.
Right.
So the character of the Robert Mitchum character in some ways is kind of like a composite of Bolt and a lot of other school teachers. David initially thought the story was not worth doing. He thought it was just too light and too flighty. Then he fell in love with a very young woman himself, even like Sandy Lean, who was barely out of her teens. I mean, he was in his late 50s. She was 19, 20. And I think that they were kind of, Bolt and Lean kind of got together and were kind of wrestling with that whole issue of older men, you know, sort of trying to satisfy younger women, just in an emotional sense, you know, and the kind of insecurity they felt, you know, to some degree.
Right.
So I think that as far as I can see would be would be my reading, my only reading of why Bolt and Lean decided to make that movie. Besides the one about they just wanted to do a sort of a a kind of an intimate love story along the lines of Brief Encounter, and this is what they were, but it got blown up. Lean was in epic mode and couldn't get out of it.
Right.
Which I think is a fair criticism to make.
What do you think it was about these landscapes that he, I mean, they're beautiful. I mean, it's amazing, especially that storm scene. I mean, like the fact that they actually shot that, I was just watching that scene again. I thought, how did they not all just die? It's unbelievable. I mean, I know that you had said in another interview, they would have done that on a computer now, and that's true. And they go right in there. What is? Do you have any idea what it was about these landscapes that he felt was worth, not shooting for days because of the weather? I mean, was there not did he not feel just focusing on the story would be enough, or like as you said, was it just a matter of being in epic mode because of his latest films? Any idea why he was so gung-ho on that, capturing all that?
Yeah, it's again, it's a good question. I think that I think he was under pressure from MGM to produce a big movie,
Right.
and that and that he went to Ireland, and what he saw kind of, I'm not saying he was blown away by it, but I think he was probably, I think he kind of felt, well, this, if I can capture some of this stuff on screen, it's really going to kind of lift that movie onto a different level. So so the beach scenes and all that, the sweeping landscapes. I think regarding the storm scene, they were kind of worried about the film and that it was kind of an epic, but it didn't have, it doesn't have a huge amount of action in it, So that they were really desperate to have a set piece of action sequence, that was going to kind of satisfy that side of the story. So the storm scene was it. The storm scene was the big action part of the movie.
Right,
that
the
was
whole subplot of getting the guns for the Irish resistance.
And so it had to look better than any storm scene ever shot before on celluloid. That was their goal. And if that involved a few local people running a little bit too close to the edge of the water, well, so be it. I mean, I think at the time in 1969, there wasn't health and safety regulations there are now.
Yeah, no, now they'd be like, you're not going anywhere near there,
I know, but none of the big stars, like the way they shot it, like you see the priest who's played by Trevor Howard, you see him running across what's called the slabs with water, cascading down on top of him, and it looks fraught with danger. Well, that's a double, so
right.
So I think Mitchum was back in LA by the time they filmed got the storm scene filmed, even though he, the bits that he's in it, he was shot, but no, it was too dangerous for the main actors. So they got local people to who knew what they were doing. They're local people. They know the sea there. They know how dangerous.
Was Leo McKern a double? Because he was like right in there. You see the water falling right on his head. But it looked like it was him. I mean, I don't know if that was a double.
No, you're right. No, he was.
He was he was right in there.
It wasn't a double. They couldn't. He had to be. That was his big C. There was a double used for one or two little bits of McKern's thing, but not when the water. But that was a big water tank being sort of emptied on top of his head.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and but no, he Sarah Miles said that that his life was almost in danger.
I imagine.
And in fact, he had a false eye. McKern had a false eye, which he was quite a kind of a humorous kind of individual, and he in Dingle, when he was going to the toilet or bathroom, whatever you would like to call it in the States, he would have his pint of Guinness or beside him, and then he'd say, "I'm going to the lavatory now," and he'd take his eye out of he'd take his false eye out and leave it on the counter, saying, "This is to keep an eye on my drink."
Oh my,
right?
that's hilarious.
And then he'd go in and come back, etc. But he lost his eye in in that storm scene, and it was difficult. It was difficult. I mean, he shouldn't have been playing around with it too much because he didn't have a replacement. So poor lad was had to wait a week or two to get a new one. So, but
Yeah,
no,
well,
he. But in fact, McKern was another guy who gave up acting after that film. I mean, he just had enough. You know, like he was battered by Lean, the demands Lean was making, and just being on the set for so long. Like McKern was there for about 19 months, 20 months.
Oof.
And then
And he was
eventually,
prone to depression, right? Wasn't he prone?
No, he was prone to, and he was prone to. I spoke to his daughter, and she thinks that it turned. You know, he developed a really bad alcohol problem.
Oh God!
As a result of, because you know, if you're on call, if you're just constantly on call, it's not like, you know, you have to be within 5 feet of a telephone. You know, you can't go. You can't kind of go, you know, I'm going for a walk or something like that, you know, or I'm going to the pub or whatever, you know. So it was very difficult for some of those actors.
Oh, I bet.
And he eventually left. He said, "I'm going now," and he said, they said, "Well, you're not finished yet." And he said, "Well, you know, use the double for the rest of it," you know, and they had to, you know. So eventually he just had enough, like, and got in his camper van and drove back to England and gave up acting for a number of years and went back to Australia.
So, well, I mean, his performance is also fantastic. I mean, again, the look on his face when they're about when they're accusing his daughter of being the one to sell out the Irish resistance fighters to the British, and of course it was him, you know, and then he couldn't, you know, the look on his face, he couldn't. I mean, he could have said, "Well, it was me, you know, kill me or something," but you know, save my daughter. But he's, you know, his character was quite cowardly, right? And just a look on his face, and then as they take her and he runs, and he couldn't bear to see it. I thought it was a wonderful performance. I mean, everybody I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, and I Leo McKern was I thought it was great in that film. Yeah, I mean,
oh no, I totally agree. And Sarah Miles as well. I thought she was fantastic. I know that you were saying, it's interesting that you were saying that she was very, very critical of the women's movement at the time. I mean, do you, you know, which is, to me, is ironic, because here she is playing this part which is all about, you know, sexual awakening of a woman, and a woman who refuses to be sort of controlled, you know, and is being her own person. And it was, you know, that's a very, it's a very feminist film in a lot of ways. So did you find that ironic, or or was it just certain things about the movement that she didn't like, or was it she just flat out, you know?
She had a very kind of no, she had a very, God love her, she's still alive and well.
Yes,
yes, and is a fantastic character, a real you know, real individual. She, you know, she had a strange kind of psychology, I suppose. You know, she was somebody who always wanted to be a boy type of thing. She grew up as a tomboy to some degree, and her father was a huge influence on her life. And she kind of got into this. I think maybe she acted up with her dad, and she found that was a way to get attention by, she'd just be outrageous. Sarah's thing was to be outrageous. Okay, so she would go against the grain on virtually everything. So so in those days, the women's liberation movement, as it was called, was kind of fashionable and up and running. And Sarah would come out and do these interviews and say, "I find young girls so boring. I mean, they've done nothing in their lives, and you know, they're not really interesting." And
oh my God.
And she would say, you know, at least if I get a man in, I mean, it was as crude as this, like, at least if I get a man in, he can change a plug for me, you know. That it was all that kind of stuff, you know, like it was almost like she was sort of being kind of
she was just rebellious in nature, I suppose.
But you know, but she was part of the swinging 60s herself. I mean, well, she was she was a young woman who had lots of boyfriends, perhaps more conservative elements would have thought that she was a little bit too kind of free with it, but she was kind of yeah. So she is kind of a bag of contradictions in a lot of ways, and yeah, that film is very. I think, just getting back to your earlier point, I think Lean and Bolt were very interested in writing a part for a woman, a big part for a woman, because the previous movies, the three big movies, the movies that they made together, the movies David made, the big epic movies like Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, had very few, if any, parts for women.
True. That's true.
Zhivago was different because there was the Julie Christie storyline in that, and I think actually that kind of sort of heightened Lean's interest in doing kind of more work along those lines, and I think that's one of the reasons why he probably went and did Ryan's Daughter. I think he enjoyed the challenge of making films for that kind of thing. So I think that's maybe part of the reason for that too. So yeah.
Did you ever wonder, Lean's, just from reading the book, he doesn't strike me as the warmest of men. He was very uncompromising and demanding, and he seemed to be, more on the cold side, but yet he had these, as they called, like the dedicated maniacs, Eddie Foley and others. I mean, what was it about him that you think that some of these people just would jump, as soon as he said jump, they would do it? Any idea why the people were so loyal to him?
Yeah, because if you work on a David Lean film, it makes your reputation. You've got a great opportunity to win awards. You've got a great, if you have that on your CV, you can get, you're never going to be short of work. I mean, you look at Freddie Young. If you look at Freddie Young, well, Freddie is actually older than David Lean, but every movie that Freddie Young made for David Lean, he won an Oscar. I mean, right. So you're talking about Lawrence of Arabia, you're talking about Dr. Zhivago and Ryan's Daughter. The three movies he did for Lean, he gets an Oscar. I mean, that's pretty incredible, really.
Oh, absolutely.
Director of photography. And yeah. But like, I suppose with the younger guys, like, he would have employed a lot of young assistants on Lawrence of Arabia, guys who were still alive, like was made back in the early 60s. But these guys might have been 19, 20 when they came on board. And he would give them a break if he liked them, but he'd expect them to work 7 days a week, right. Like 14 hours a day. Like, you had to dedicate your life to it, to lots of ways. And if you're prepared to do that, and if you, and you survived, you're a good chance you're going to be working on the next one. And I suppose, they know they're going to get 18 months solid work out of it, or years solid work out of it.
That's true.
And they can maybe, they can go to Bahamas for 6 months afterwards. I don't know, but I think that's part of the reason. So yeah.
What I was curious why you chose to put Eddie Foley on the cover. I mean, I love that cover, and with that gray hair, Eddie Foley with that great white top there. Why Foley on the cover?
Well, can I just? I wouldn't do this gratuitously. His name is pronounced Fowley, right?
Oh, I'm sorry,
Eddie Fowley.
Okay,
Fowley. Eddie Fowley. And the reason why I say that is he was described as Foul Eddie, right?
Oh, right, that's right.
Yeah. So Robert Mitchum called him Foul Eddie.
Mitchum, of course,
because he was his bad language and everything. And but Fowley was one of the outrageous characters in the film, in the making of the film, and an ex-British Army guy who kind of was just crazy, just wild, wild. He was the prop man, but he was kind of like David's kind of alter ego. Like David was kind of posh and kind of reserved. He was a Quaker. Fowley was kind of a wild man. You know, he was kind of like people would say he was kind of almost like a lion. You know, like on Lawrence of Arabia, he'd be stripped down to a short pair of trousers. You know, he'd be brown as a berry, and he'd be kind of he'd be directing all these extras, etc., etc., etc. So he was kind of a magnificent human specimen in some ways. And but like his story is kind of a thread through the book, you know, about how he found Kerry, because he was a locations manager as well as a prop man. So he was one of the guys who found Kerry. I mean, other people will say, well, he didn't play as big a role as he said he played. You know, he tended to blow his own trumpet a bit, like, but nonetheless, he had very important bearing on it, and so he's a thread through the movie, because the Hollywood people, in inverted commas, got on great with the locals, because the locals, it was like kind of El Dorado, you know, for them. Like it was kind of like gold rush, having Ryan's daughter on the peninsula for a year. And but Fowley kind of rubbed a few noses up the wrong way, just because he was a bit vulgar, you know, and he also ran off with a local young girl, which, you know, ruffled a few feathers. And
right, because he was married, right?
Yeah, you know, but you know, that picture, like, was kind of sums up the kind of, you know, on the beach, you know, with a kind of a false seagull. You know, there was lots of stories about kind of David was looking for seagulls. You know, there's not enough seagulls, because he wanted the seagulls to represent the freedom which Sarah, the girl, was looking for in terms of flying away, right, you know, and wings.
Yeah.
So he needed seagulls in the shot the whole time. But so if there was no seagulls around, Eddie would come with that, what you see there.
There it is again. I love it.
yeah, and so at least I think they'd actually film not that they'd filmed the shadow of that on the beach. So you will see the shadow of a seagull on the beach.
I see. Right.
That'll be
so
him.
It didn't look fake, I suppose.
But other than that, they just scatter fish heads on the beach, and suddenly you would have hundreds and thousands of seagulls.
Right.
And David would say, too many seagulls now, too many seagulls, get rid of some of the seagulls. So it was kind of like one of those, you know, like if you look at no, there should be a picture in the book of guys scattering the fish heads on the beach to draw in the seagulls. Yeah, so the seagulls are one of the big stars of that film.
Oh no, definitely. I know you have to go. I just wanted to ask lastly, what I love so much about the book is how detailed it is. I mean, the locations, the people, the weather. I mean, it really transports the reader right there. I mean, the images are so strong. I mean, was that, when you're writing the book, is that also your intent to make the people feel that they are right there with these people? Because I certainly felt that way.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
That's
I mean, if I've achieved that, like, it's fantastic, you know, because that's exactly what I wanted to do, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to kind of write a book about, you know, Ryan's daughter's place in movie history, or, you know, that would have to be a bit of that. But I wanted to get people to feel as if they were pretty much there, that they could kind of smell the sea, you know, they could smell the sea, or they could taste the Guinness in the local pub, or, you know, that they could feel the kind of tension, and feel the and have an empathy for the boredom that the crew would have gone through, you know, as they waited for so long, either for the storm or for the sun, you know. So yeah, no, that was totally the intention, to try to make people feel as almost as if they could touch Rosie Ryan's umbrella, you know. And yeah, so that was the idea. That's really why I kind of wrote a book, you know, like it was kind of like a challenge to do that, you know. And I felt
definitely.
You kind of needed a kind of a big canvas, I think, to tell that story, which is why People would say, "What are you writing a book for Ryan's daughter about Ryan's daughter about? It wasn't a success. People have forgotten about it. Blah blah blah, etc. etc." And I said, "Well, it's a great story.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic story,
it
and it
certainly
deserves to
is.
be told. And its reception is part of the story, and the disappointment for Lean after all the effort he put into it, like, and and um and and so that the kind of tragedies that some of the tragedies, which are another story, maybe for another hour we can do it, like some of the other stories that
Oh,
followed it,
oh,
so
yes, the aftermath. Yeah, a lot of that came as, I mean, some of it was quite scary with that journalist and that
yeah.
Sarah Miles had an affair with and everything. I mean, afterwards, I mean, that, yeah, like that came as quite a shock to me as well. But the book is wonderful, and I must say, I love the film too. I mean, I know people don't care for it, but I mean, maybe some people do. It has a mixed reaction feelings, but um I think it's a wonderful film. And again, the book, Ryan's Daughter, The Making of an Irish Epic. Uh, Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I really, really highly recommend it. Again, whether you're a film fan or not, it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. Just before you go, I just wanted to thank from the University Press of Kentucky, who published the book, Meredith. I hope I'm saying her name right. Doherty. I hope I'm saying that right, is the publicist who put us in touch, coordinated this today. So I just wanted to say thank you to Meredith and Paul. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Your pronunciation of Doherty was brilliant. I mean, that is,
Oh, I got it.
that is, I think you got it bang on there, because people try it. That's certainly how it's pronounced in Ireland for sure. And it's
There we
an
go.
Irish name. We don't say Doherty or Doherty, we say Doherty. And my admiration for you has gone up another few notches, Rob. So well done on
Well,
that score. Yeah,
I gave it a shot. I guess I hit it.
yeah. Okay.
Well,
No.
thanks again, and I hope we can come
Okay.
again. We'll do another talk. There's so much to talk about, so we can schedule it
Yeah.
another time.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube video podcast and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found, youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out, and it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which as a member, you will have access to vote on. So if you like my work and you're interested in supporting me over on Patreon, head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to the YouTube channel by looking right underneath the video. You will see the like, dislike, comment buttons, and beside those buttons there will be a link that will say thanks. Click the thanks tab, and from there, feel free to leave a donation if you wish. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my YouTube video podcast, which again, it is absolutely free to do so, by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that, and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.